of equipment, I forgot just how crisp the older radios were out of the box. And this is not this radio has not been upgraded. I already checked. Finals are normal. Everything's where it should be. I mean, everything's either way was where it should be. It'd be great if it was an upgrade. All these old radios can be upgraded. 23 channels are nothing to sneeze at, because there are upgrade kits that an adept person can deal with in about an hour's worth of work, and your radio can be screaming, talking a lot farther without a linear amplifier. Okay. But this little radio is very crisp, and it's even the speaker, which is, 40 years old? Let's see, no, probably about 44 or 45 years old. I think this radio was made in 75. It sounds better than the brand new radios I just installed in the SUVs, okay, that I've been working on last weekend. And I like those little radios, but this is a little radio. But it's like everything else from back in the day. The components are either American-made or high-end Hong Kong, which is low-end, but high-end by comparison to the China junk. And I can't emphasize enough that if you pay attention to these yard sales or these estate sales, I've either gotten the radios and a lot of other stuff, tons of other stuff. I'm just now going through one part of what I got like 3 weeks ago that I mentioned on the air. I discovered more things every time I move a tool. It's bins of tools, okay? And one of the things I also had were cases of stuff from storage. Well, one of the things I got was this radio, and I got 2 other radios. Both of those are gone and down the road immediately because they are the old CB, pre-CB as you know it, Citizens Band relay radios, and I have a grid somewhere else, so they're already gone and down the road as of Saturday. But pay attention, guys. There's stuff coming out of estate sales. There's stuff people have in the garage that, Grandpa had. They're putting right out by the road. If you see always kind of watch for antennas, because usually that's going to be the telltale. Again, they're usually like little magnet mount antennas because they don't poke in well anywhere, so somebody usually stuffs them in the top of the junk. If you see something like that, stop. At least grab the antenna, even if the coax is cut off. Remember, those are components. You can unscrew all of that. It all disassembles. Everybody forgets. I put 2 antennas together last weekend for somebody from the pile of wrecks that we have that I've been picking up. And again, good enough for what it's for. There's nothing wrong with the components. It's just they gack the, one part of the equipment or another. So what you do is everything else is up for grabs. And if you piecemeal this, piecemeal that, now you got a complete one. And maybe a little better than what they started with. Or I should say better than the individual component systems when they were by themselves, because you can upgrade. Anyway, in this case, nice little radio, little Viking, really clean. I really hate to even, that's one of those things. You got this classic radio, and it didn't get beat around, didn't get dinged up, doesn't have a chip on the frame, on the metal paint job. It's got a crinkle paint job. But it's got to go to service, so it's getting used, and it's going to be in one of my trucks, and away we go. So there's a lot of stuff like that. 23 it'd be nice to have 40 channels, but 23 will work. And remember, I will point out that all of the 23-channel radios out of the box are more powerful typically than the 40-channel radios brand new out of the box that were built right after, right when they approved the new frequencies. There's a reason. That was the compromise. Yeah, because CB with 23 channels was getting cluttered. We'll give you 40 channels, but you got to agree that we're going to knock the range of the radios down too. So after they were up to a certain point out of the box from the factory, they kicked back the transmitter output. And so a 40-channel radio does have more options, but it can't go as far without improvements. You got to fix it. You got to add to it. And that's just the way of the world. That's the kind of garbage and chicanery that government always pulls. They don't want you to get outside your walking distance of your property. If they could have you, look what they just did with the lockdown. Come on, people. If they could get your ass locked down and keep you right there like you're a prisoner in your own home, they'd do it, and they just did. That's what these rotten pig control freaks are all about. Why they just need to be dragged out and shot. That's the bottom line. But again, they have done that. So if they could, what do you mean if they could? They already have, okay? They've already done it. But anyway, the old idea is that, minimize, and whatever you do, they could totally monitor. Well, with freestyle radio, it's a little harder to do that. You got to make a lot more of an effort, because you really have to have people in the area where the transmitting is taking place. Unlike with the internet, where you can have someone sitting on their dead ass in Haifa and Tel Aviv, and those trashy little oi boys can be listening in on all kinds of stuff, and meanwhile diddling themselves and grabbing each other's private little parts, their little weenies, and going to town on each other, because they'll be distracted like that, the pedos being what they are. But they still will be there with an ear. Whereas otherwise, they have to get out in the field, because, if you're smart, like I said, you don't go, balls to the walls, maximum broadcast if I only need to talk to somebody down the road here. You tailor your transmission. You learn to use your radio equipment. You become a master of that trade, just like you should become a master of all of the other components of the arts of war. Okay? The many arts, not the art of war. The arts, the many elements that make up the multifaceted weapons system, communications systems, supply and support. I mean, I'll go right down the shopping list. Land navigation in and of itself is an art and a science that all of you need to learn. And everybody, of course, I knew it was going to happen. And usually that's not going to be a genuine one of our people making a comment. It's usually the oi boys terrified that you will actually follow up. Well, what's wrong? Something wrong with your GPS? We're talking about buy. I have put a little posting. It's like buy maps, acquire maps. And immediately there's this character you've never seen before. Well, who is that? Well, that's one of the trolls from Haifa, Tel Aviv, Brussels, or over from China. And, oh, hell no, you can't be thinking that way. You're stupid. You need GPS. Guys, we disable all the GPS in all of our thermal. You know why they wanted to put all that GPS and cool stuff on your equipment, don't you? Ping, ping, ping. I mean, after all, don't you have GPS on your phones? Ping, 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 ping. Oh, that's right. But it's got all these cool things I don't really need, because it's a site. I don't need it for land navigation. Why do I need a site to have a GPS on board? Why do I have to have a thermal site with GPS on board? Anybody? What's the need for that? I don't really need it at all, seriously. But somebody else would if they're trying to keep track of the technology in the field. We had our computer geeks start working on that problem the moment we started to realize it. I had this discussion with Don when they first came up with it. We immediately got a little gang of predators together, and they went through and hunted down all the problems in the software package and got rid of those problems. And we actually have a group that's all they do. Not only that, but if you're smart, you pay attention to what the code for your particular piece of equipment is, and you create a duplicate pinger, so to speak. Yes, one ping only, Yuri. Yeah, but it's not where it should be. Yes, I know, Yuri. That's the whole idea. One ping only. Hunt for Red October. Yes, one ping only. Maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 20, depending on whether they want to drop the bomb on you. But anyway, we're not supposed to think about that. You do realize that. We're not supposed to be that smart. So remember, we're not. We're not that smart. But wait, I talked about it. Therefore, I must think about it. Therefore, I know about... Oh, that's right. Anyway. So, other things real quick. We were on caching in the last hour, and we're overlapping into it here. That's another thing, electronics and optics. The more sophisticated it is, the less likely you're going to want to in the long phase of a caching program. But you can do conventional optics. Now, I would recommend that, as was pointed out with our little seal meal package, you got to be careful when you're doing vacuum pull on stuff. You can still do a light vacuum to, again, stabilize the package. But binoculars, smaller monoculars, anything that's a conventional rifle sight can work as a monocular or as a range, again, an identification optic rangefinder. Because depending on the equipment you've got, never throw away your old scopes. Well, my old scope, the reticle fell apart on it, and it's so cheap it's not worth. Oh, so in other words, it's paid for. Yep. And you think it's broken? Well, yeah, the reticle doesn't work. Can you still see through it? Yep. Does it magnify? Yep. Well, that'd make a pretty nice piece of optics to put into a cache for not for a rifle sight, but because I need something so that I can observe my area of operation. See how that works? Didn't cost me anything. I got a phosphoroscope, or I got an old Tasco, couple of different kitty scopes. They're all stuff that, hey, they're not great. In fact, you might just have them as spares. Well, those are great for observation optics, to be able to hand to somebody and go, get up there on that ridge, here's your radio pack, here's some food, here's your location, here's the map, and I want you to take this optic with you, and you're the observer. Okay, congratulations. That one little piece of optics is the difference between kind of squinting and figuring maybe there's 5 guys and realizing there's 10. See how that works? So it would be a good idea. None of your optics are junk. In fact, I'm going to go to this point. All the little kitty optics, a lot of the stuff they do now, isn't all that junky. As far as, in other words, it'll do what it's supposed to do. It just may not be as durable. But I pack stuff like that away constantly, because if I'm not going to have somebody bouncing around, if I plop their arse down someplace, I got a 9-power, inexpensive, scope. It's probably got plastic lenses. Doesn't have as nice a light collection, but it sure will work to get me the image I want for your radio observation post, an RO.
Dad, on the other spectrum of that, sometimes it's more robust because they expect kids to be playing with it.
Exactly. Well, it won't draw any attention. It won't be one of those things where everybody's concerned, but it does enough to, get the basics done. And again, you're not trying to do rocket science here. You might just be doing body counts. You just might be identifying an activity. Remember, your other side's going to be caching and deploying and doing a lot of other things too. You need to pay attention and watch while they're doing it. Just because they're putting something in the ground doesn't mean they are it's supposed to be accessible, doesn't mean it isn't booby-trapped. Quietly and patiently watching your enemy's activities, when you see additional action or activity that doesn't seem to be normal or doesn't fit in line with the construction of the cairn / cache, you might want to really, really pay attention to where the focus of interest and activity is and where it goes to. Laying lines for, demolitions, munitions, command detonations, stuff like that would be a good idea to pay attention. So a very quiet LPOP, listening post, observation post, can do a lot, and with some simple optics can do a lot more. Okay, so just a heads up there. Another thing, real quick, with regard to, let's go back because it's Communications Tuesday. With regard to handhelds, somebody just said, well, what kind of radios would you give a scout like that? Your CB radio would work. Again, here's the thing. Your LPOPs are going to be at high points or at, again, commanding areas of large interest. It can be a ridge, can be a peak on the tactical slope is where you want to be, on the tactical rise. You don't want to be on the peak on making a silhouette of yourself, so the tactical crest is where you want to be. Anyway, fact of the matter is that when you do deploy, you want something that is going to reach, but also if you can, you want it directional. Now, this is where we've talked about little Yagi antennas. Would I prioritize using a Yagi for something like that? That would make sense. Yagis for 800 meg, 900 meg, and even for 2 meter are relatively small, depending on if it's quarter wave, half wave, whatever. And in this case, it's going to be quarter wave. Or eighth wave. Actually, it can be smaller still. You can make these however you want to in terms of size. Now, remember how twitchy the antenna is going to be, because it's a directional antenna. It's something you need to take into consideration. I've always recommended, if you're going to do a Yagi, take along a simple, a dowel, a pole, a mop handle, a broom handle, and clean it up, camouflage it, and be ready to clamp that Yagi. Set it up so that Yagi can be clamped to something that you can stick in the ground to stabilize. You can just hold it, and then while you're communicating, you actually adjust and turn and adjust by, elevation and traverse. Think about it that way. What you're doing is twisting it left and right, but also pushing the pole forward or backward to get whatever you need to zero your Yagi, which is a directional antenna. Once you've got it zeroed, benchmark on the ground, put a mark there to identify the direction, and then you're going to have to personally eyeball orientation so that you can keep the mark where it's supposed to be, okay? But what this does is minimize your possibility of intercept with regard to signal, and in the process gives a very dynamic message, spoon or rush to the target area. It'll be very easy to hear you. Now, the advantage of that, because you focus the transmission, you can now bring down the amount of power you're shooting down the antenna. You don't need all that energy. Okay, you can wheel back to the footprint even more, making it harder to identify that LPOP. Just a little heads up, why there's more bells, whistles, and buttons on certain machines. Okay. Again, the other thing here, remember, with the Yagi antennas, while you transmit most of your signal in one direction, at 180 degrees in the other direction, you are shooting a directional signal in that direction, the opposite direction, wherever you intended to go, every time. Even though the lion's share of your signal and energy will be going downrange, the other trap or ID point is directly to the rear of that signal. Otherwise, the other 378 degrees out there are neutral, or very, very small, fluffy print, very, very, very close to the transceiver, okay, very close to the antenna. So this is why Yagi is a good thing. The other thing is that FRS radios, yes, that was the question here. Well, would you use FRS radios? Yeah, I would use any radio I had a prolific number of, that would be proficient in operation, because the LPOP is useless if you can't talk. So whatever you do put up on that ridge or in that tree or up on that, that tower over there, that, you got to be able to get down. Don't forget just getting up. If you put somebody up anything, you better send a rope with them, because they better be able to get down fast. Better to get down fast and get damaged a little bit than to be stuck with your hind end up in a high spot, to be nothing but a Japanese sniper hanging by a rope later, so to speak. If you can imagine that image, which you don't want to be part of. Okay. So proper planning prevents poor performance. Not only do you have a way to, again, get the signal out, not only are you able to deploy, but you've got to be able to unass the AO. In other words, detach from the action and do it in such a way that you are going to preserve manpower. So always think things through. We don't put somebody up something if we can't get them down out of it. That's one of the problems with vertical control points of any kind. They're great. Yeah, I can see a long way away. It's kind of like Beau's Geste, okay? Every remake. Remember what was the big thing in Beau's Geste? There was that lookout tower in the middle of the fort. It was a French outpost. And the sergeant, every once in a while, would tell the man, get up there. Now, at first, they didn't think twice, and they ran up the ladder. And the first time there was an attack, Jacques fell from the tower because he was shot. And they send another one up, the sergeant does. And then the next attack, there's Jacques too. He goes down. My goodness, maybe we should send somebody up with a different name. We will send up Francois. And Francois looks at the sergeant, and he looks at the tower, and then he climbs up anyway. And during the third attack, wow, did not make any difference if we changed his name. He was still killed. If you remember, in Beau's Geste, every time after that, when the sergeant told someone to get up the tower, they knew it was a death sentence. Mon Dieu. You see, we don't want that. We should kind of be able to figure that out. We're not the French military, okay? So proper planning prevents piss-poor performance. Think ahead. Also, remember, evacuation and escape routes. Sometimes that just ain't going to happen. Only because, fickle finger of fate, your enemy might move in such a way that you literally are awash in aggressors on the ground, but you may not be observed, or you may not be detected. Well, that's where you hunker down, shut up, and don't do anything. Okay, it's that simple. So you figured out that's part of the common sense program. However, in many cases, especially when you can perceive the threat, you do have the opportunity to make the choice to save equipment and your arse, and I want that because you're manpower that I need for later. So we all need to be thinking ahead. Nobody's expendable. By the way, usually a team, not an individual. A team, a buddy, two men, not one. We've talked about this. Remember the Kenosha kid, the Kenosha kid getting stuck out there on the limb. Can't do that. You may be short, but you're not that short. You're going to make sure that your team is able to move each other. In fact, remember, depending on how serious it gets, they may be a fire and maneuver element unto themselves that lends support. Maybe, maybe not. Depends how bad it is and how distracted they become as far as trying to save their hind end. So, anyway, communications. With regard to FRS radios, I will point out again, I'm seeing a bunch of these. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them, but there's a bunch of these desktop FRS weather radios. They're coming out all over the place. I've seen them. I've kind of checked down using Cincinnati as a center point for Facebook Marketplace. They sometimes are both, they're FRS, sometimes they have marine, and then they also have the Weather Channel. Now, the lion's share seem to be mostly FRS and the Weather Channels. So you've got the ability to talk on all the standard channels for FRS, and you have weather service. I'm more interested in the FRS, but any extra benefits I get are fine. I ended up with now a total, I just put one in an office somewhere, but I think I have 8 that were in all the boxes, and I probably have another one, I think, in the boxes I'm still going through. So I'm going to have close to 10 of these radios. I didn't pay anything for them. They came from different. Each one came from, well, not each one. 3 or 4 of them came from one location. The guy might have been using them as an intercom in the house because you could do that. We had the FRS radio. Why not? You have them on the desk. You have them on the counter. You plug them in, kind of like a marine radio on a boat where you use the marine radio as your intercom radio. You actually have intercom option for short range, but it's still wireless. Same thing. So the FRS radios can be used that way. Now, the neat thing about that is, in theory, those tabletops might have a little more output. I haven't had a chance to meter them, but they are probably putting out a few more watts of power, which means while they are more powerful, they would be useful for mobile operations. They will run off of a battery pack. They do typically have, the ones I have AA battery packs. They have a AA battery station on board built into the body. However, they do run off a wall wart, off a standard, AC/DC power supply. So these are out there. Check Facebook Marketplace, look at Craigslist, go into the radio section, and in fact, even punch in FRS Weather Channel Radio. See what you get. Most of them are realistic. Somebody's asking what brands are they? Well, I've got Kenwood's, and I have Realistic, and most of them are Realistic, but what I can see, which is Radio Shack. They either say Realistic or they say Radio Shack on them. So this is a generational thing, very popular in a certain period of time, obviously, which is why they keep popping up. And it's just a matter of, again, do you need this kind of equipment? Well, if you get it for $5 or $10 a radio, they went for a lot more. I think the radio cost about $49.95 or $55, right around there. So if you get it for $5 or $10, it's reasonable. A lot of them are brand new in the box. They were bought, one of them, like say 5 might be bought, like in the 5, there were 4 that were out of the box, 1 brand new, never opened, but all the boxes were there and everything was in the box. So pretty cool. Anyway, another thing here, again, with FRS, remember, the closer you are to a metropolitan area, the more cluttered the background's going to be. Your dope dealers are using FRS. A lot of your other cop shop, brown envelope criminal thugs use FRS to get off of the grid, but still coordinate when they're stealing stuff from us peasants. That happens a lot, especially with the criminal elements in the bigger police departments. In fact, both criminal groups do this. And you will notice this if you have FRS and you move like into St. Louis, you're moving on the expressway, and you monitor. You're going to start getting up with all this battle chatter. It's actually like foreign language, not foreign language, but it's actual, it's phonetic code battle chatter going back and forth all over the place. And you'll hear the homie fries, you'll hear any number of other different characters, in background and, distinct dialect. So you tell me. Anyway, it's out there, so it's usable. And you're going to see more of it laying around. The big thing is, as I've mentioned, warning, danger, Will Robinson, danger. The big thing is with FRSs, but also with any of the Chinese radios, a lot of them are proprietary battery radios. If somebody throws those away, kind of like in a James Bond movie where Bond has got the pistol and he's shooting and he runs out of ammo and he looks at his gun disgustingly and he throws his gun down, would you do that? I don't think I would. That was kind of stupid. Yeah, but he was disgusted with his pistol. How dare the gun run out of ammo? I need to throw my gun away. Well, people are like this with a lot of stuff, and you're going to find they'll do this with the radios because in their mind, if they can't find it right away, they're going to be dropping stuff that they need instant gratification or somewhat instant gratification, and they don't get it, so they will be petulant. When they are petulant, they will throw stuff down. When they throw it down, you will get free radios. Now, let me point something out. Remember, you take a little junk-a-munk battery rack off of a China Sport toy that carries 2 or 3 batteries. You take and identify where your points of contact are. By the way, you can also confirm, what is the radio, what's the power output that's necessary from the power pack to run the radio? Oh, wait a minute, let's see, it is 4.5 volts. Isn't that like, well, let's see, 1.5 volts per battery? Well, that would be like 3 AA or AAA batteries together, wouldn't it? So you find a China Sport junk piece of equipment that's kind of already messed up, or maybe not messed up, cannibalize the little battery pack, grab a couple little hair leads off of there, solder that, or, solder would be best. But if you have the battery backpack, which is, usually defunct by the time they throw it down in disgust, which is what you'll see a lot of, you take the battery and use it as a retainer to squash where the 2 contact points are, the positive and negative lead, off of the little battery pack that you have. Take some, friction tape or 2 little pieces of duct tape your power supply to the back of your stupid little radio that has the useless battery on it but has the useful battery pack on it. Hit the power switch and wow! All of a sudden your FRS radio works. Or your Baofiang works, depending on what you got. Scavenge everything. Go ahead, caller, jump in there.
If you've been noticing some of these, this is Todd down in Orlando, by the way. If you've been noticing a lot of these videos with the BLM crowds and the Antifa crowds, every one of these people that have like airsoft loadouts or whatever, every one of them, if they do have a radio, they have a Baofeng. They're cheap, they're plentiful. There's a bunch of information on how to operate them, but every one of these people do have a Baofeng radio. Yeah. So we can assume that, these people talk, and they talk to each other all over the country, and everybody has a Baofeng radio. There are ways, by way of using a very strong linear amp, of basically, putting out a huge wave of power over the area where they're at, and just frying all of their communications.
A null frequency, yeah. You could basically a signal generator. The military used to crank them out all over the place. They up to 60 watts for the more portable ones, and that was their mission. They're actually a single transmitter with no final, filters, no filters on board at all. And those were electronic countermeasure transmitters. That's what they were for. They're about the size of 3 bread boxes. And you used to get them for $60 at the auction back in the 80s and early 90s because nobody knew what to do with them. And we did. We grabbed every one of those we could because you can tweak those. We've got enough radio geeks, just like you said. You create a mushroom broadcast jamming or more destructive wave, depending on how much energy you've got available. You may not have enough power always to push the big signal downrange, but at the very least, you can make it so dirty that for the element or for the bandwidth that they were hoping to operate, FRS, 2 meter, whatever, that you can literally swamp it with a dead signal that washes over everything. That makes it difficult, if not impossible, to get through. And most of them won't know to use Morse. Well, code gets through when voice won't, but code still means that you'll probably have to repeat everything multiple times.
Yeah, so none of these people know Morse code.
Oh, yeah. Well, they probably know SOS, maybe, if they watched enough video games.
Yeah. Well, another thing you were mentioning was was using a Yagi antenna with the CB. It can also be used, you can use a dipole, and a dipole, it does not take a lot of weight in your pack. You can just, put it in a Ziploc bag, push all the air out and put it in one of your pockets, and you've got a dipole. And I have one of these. I don't know if you're familiar with the brand. It's a Cherokee handheld radio.
Yeah, Cherokee, yeah, they've been around forever, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of copies of those, too. I have the Albrecht AE2990, and I've got a dipole for it, a 10-meter dipole, and I've got, what I take with me in my pack is a tent pole, okay? And I can expand the tent pole out, and then I can take a weight with fishing line, and I can throw it up into, like well, down here in Florida, we have pine trees that the branches, they come out, and they usually don't have a lot of other branches that obscure the area like an oak tree. But on a pine tree, I can throw it, 60, 70 feet in the air if it's the weight is big enough. And then I can, on the other side, I can pull that down and then pull the dipole all the way up in the tree if I have, 60, 70 foot of coax. But you don't need, the thing is, it's not like you're pushing power through the coax and it takes more power, it's going to drain. That's not how a CB works, or a ham radio. You're using the coax mainly as a reception. You've got it 50, 60 foot in the air, and I'm on 10 meter. I'm hearing people all over the world. So, yeah, 4 watts is not a lot, but remember I've told you about those antennas from the guy on eBay. The 45-inch whip antennas do provide a whole lot more reception and transmit, but if you get a dipole up in the air that's 50, 60 feet up in the air and you're camping out, not only are you going to receive everything, and I'm picking everything up between 10 and 12 meter, but you're also going to be able to broadcast much farther even on 4 watts. Now, if you wanted to get really special, you could take a motorcycle battery with you and have it power like a 30 watt linear amp, which doesn't take up a lot of space either. But a radio kit, like a ham radio kit, there's a lot of guys that, if you type into YouTube, ham radio, camping, or, something like that, they're taking ham radio setups out, handheld ham radio setups, and they're still getting out there. They're able to broadcast, 100, 200 miles on a limited amount of wattage. It's not that hard, and the setup does not take that much. So something to consider for a loadout is, even if you have, an Alice set up and you got a butt pack, it's not going to take up that much more room.
Well, one of the things that's neat, the latest batch of Molly frames, the ones that they now use, are cheap. The biggest thing is, about 2 years ago when we really started pushing these because they were so cheap, maybe 3, they've progressively gone up a little bit, but you can get the suspenders, you can get the wraparound super padded utility belt that goes with it, and then you take a plastic panel like we were talking about, and a couple of the shelves that are made for those. They make shelves, and they're made out of plastic too. So the neat thing about the plastic is it's insulation. Alice frames, we've done this quite a bit with. They're aluminum. The only thing you have to remember, guys, they're aluminum. So you got to watch, where things connect and how things hook up or touch, especially antennas. But the neat thing about the Molly frames is that everything's polymer, everything's plastic, so it's all insulation. On top of that, you put a little plastic panel in the back, drill the holes you want for, like you said, and shelves, to use the shelves as they belong. And you can hook up a small battery unit like you're talking about with any number of different ways you can make it weatherized. And on top of that, then carry all the rest of your gear with a committed backpack, fixtures or modules. There's hundreds of them to choose from. And a lot of them are padded, very, very well padded. I've got one I just got for free. It's about the size of one of these, what they call, it's not a day pack, but more like a patrol pack. And all of them are pretty much the same. They've got a back chamber, they've got a middle chamber that's a little smaller, and it's a progressive teardrop, and it also is a progressive angle out from the back of your neck down. So each pouch is a little smaller. But there's a bunch of little sub-pouches, which are fantastic for all the other little junk that a radio operator uses. And, you can even has Molly straps on the outside, so you can take these padded radio pouches for other gear. By the time you're done, you got a pretty bounce-free piece of equipment that you can put together and, jump on right away, get it on your back and go, and everything you need would be right there. A real quick trick, you're talking about running the wire, okay? 2 things. Now, here's one that the guys have done for years. Take and watch, I just got a half a dozen of these in the last weekend, little cheapy fishing pole, okay? Go back and bring in fact, if you want to, sometimes they're disassembled. You can take and disassemble it. You only need about a few inches worth, let's say 6 to 8 inches worth of pole beyond where the reel is. You take a standard D-clip, or hanger, fixture hanger for, hooks, line, and sinker. And in this case, rather than putting hooks and line on it, you have the standard line, you have your retainer, and then you have a teardrop fishing weight. And what you use that for is, like you said, you want to aim for that spot up there, and the weight goes up and drops over. You tie off the line that you want to pull up, and then you reel it back in, take your wire and bring it right over the top of the tree point there, however you want to insulate and set everything up to your choice. But the other option is slingshots. They're really good. A simple, crude Y-type slingshot, and again, fishing line and a regular fishing weight, a teardrop. Not real big. Doesn't have to be real heavy, guys, because remember, you're just going to run the line. The big thing is you want the line strong enough that it can handle whatever you're going to be pulling or, towing back up, through and around wherever you shot the lead. So those are two little tools you can put in the toolbox. Either one will work. The fishing line thing, the advantage of the fishing pole is it also still is a little tiny fishing pole. So keep that in mind, that making up a little rig like that, there are some really nice collapsible tiny tot fishing poles that are sold at Cabela's or even on the China Sport channels, no matter where you go, whatever you go to. And they're really well made. They're totally collapsible and take up little or no space and would serve more than one purpose. They're a survival tool, and they can be used with your radio operator. So you let Bob carry it. The radio operator, Bob, carries the fishing pole on top of everything else. So that would be another thing. Just an idea, but it's something we know works. I know guys that use them all the time. So
well, I just recently bought, and they still have these on eBay. You're going to notice that they don't have not very many of the magazine pouches for 7.62 NATO magazines, but they do have a lot of the USGI military 200 round saw pouches. Yep. They still have those on eBay and everywhere else. They're like, $12-15 a piece. Now you can use those actually to put the 20 round, the 308, whatever it's
any of the slab mags for the big 20 rounder, 308.
Right.
Yeah.
So but that pouch also is deep enough and wide enough for a handheld radio plus spare batteries, and if you want to put a dipole in it, it will fit everything you need in a radio kit. Okay, that pouch is perfect because it's got the two plastic frame parts on the side that keep it, stable. So I've got on a belt, an Alice belt, 4 of those, and one of them is a dedicated radio pouch, because the radio pouches they sell, they're not. It's for the radio and that's it. But you're taking more than the radio, because you're definitely going to be taking spare batteries, and if you're going to be out there for an extended period of time, you're going to also be taking some kind of collapsible solar setup to recharge your batteries in a charger, and you need a charger as well.
Exactly. Well, you can get the little smaller flexi fold-up solar panels right now that are that size to be perfect for what you're doing. That's another option. We could go right in, could be carried and left down the gear, so they're committed, which is a really good idea. Even if you couldn't carry it in that pouch, it's another thing you could put on the backpack. Stuff it somewhere, because power and convenient like that. Yeah, we wished for that years ago. I mean, you got to remember, whenever we were using military radios, first of all, the battery weighed as much as most of your radio equipment in its entirety does now.
That's why the cargo shelf was there.
Yeah, and thank God the cargo. Well, you see, I still have a bunch of the NPRC 25 and 77 radio backs. I really should sell some of those to into the Vietnam market right now. But I don't really want to get rid of them, because trying to find more, they were convenient. They worked well. They were well designed because they kept the radio snug to your back. They didn't bounce around. My biggest problem, I got my head knocked out. I got a mild concussion. I know I did. I had to shrug it off. But we were running cross country, and we went across a road grade, and I didn't know that there was a 15-foot drop off on the other side at about I'd say an 80-degree angle, right? I saw the guy disappear in front of me, and I had just switched the radio rig over while we were on the move, and I had it on my shoulders, but I didn't have it belted down. And when we stepped off, the radio came down and smacked me in the back of the head real clean. Oh, it did a good job. I do not remember when I got to the bottom of that where I did land on both feet. But we kept moving, and I don't remember the next half hour of movement. In fact, even picturing it right now, I remember where I stopped afterwards. I know where I did it. I can picture crossing the road. I mean, really, it was about twilight, like right now outside. And the guy in front of me disappeared, and that didn't seem right to me. And I realized, oh, son of a... And even as I did it, and of course that good old MPRC 77 with 2 spare batteries and everything else on board came back and smacked me in the back of the head as I hit the ground first, and it followed. And then I pushed it down the rest of the way, bolted it up, kind of just followed the guy in front of me. And I think about half an hour later is where we're in our next rally point, and I'm standing there and I'm trying to think, where in the hell am I? You know, it's one of those things where you oogle-doogle, you know. And then I kind of, oh, man, and then what was it, Randy comes in and goes, you don't look too good. I said, yeah, I think I smacked my head back there. He goes, yeah, well, you know, we're going to stop here for now anyway. This is the next rally point. So I had time to collect my thoughts. What little gray matter I had, it was operational. But
so now those radios are a lot more, they're a lot less susceptible to interference as far as jamming or an EMP or any other kind of disruption.
Oh yeah, they're totally ruggedized. I mean, one thing about it, the 25, remember, has more tube components, not many, but they're virtually almost the same radio. The 25 and the 77 there was no crossover time on those. It was pretty straightforward. The big advantage was again, increased range. I don't know that the tubes were a plus. I don't know losing the tubes was a plus, because when they did that back in the day, there were more transistors applied. And in that day, the transistors were pretty resilient. But in the long haul, transistors are one of the weak points in all of our present communications. And in fact, for the middle-aged stuff that's out there, you'll notice this. You can get a lot of soundboards, for instance. We've had this experience for decades. You get a lot of soundboards that are relatively cheap, that are classic, okay, that are on the market. Well, you want to make sure you plug them in and you take a headset with you and you check every pot, because typically the larger format transistors are, what happens is in one pot or another, either 1, 2, or 3 of them will be shot. The same thing happens with, I don't take it as an overpower, just a little too much energy coming down the line. It's not easy to do with a radio like a military rig, but like you said, if you're running a wire and you're in electrical, and I've been in a lot of electrical. Now, I've never lost a radio like that. I've never lost I run AMPRC 8s, 9s, 10s, AMPRC 25s, AMPRC 77s, and GRC 125s, and I've never lost one to significant electrical damage, but I have been in horrific electrical storms with military equipment in service. And the only problem is I've had some diminished problems, which eventually the units had to be sent back to, like the one we were out the night the Edmund Fitzgerald went out. I was in a Special Forces training exercise. It was worst weather you could imagine. More light than dark. It was at night, and it was like stark white daylight nonstop. That's how heavy the electrical storm was. Those radios, 2 of them, we had to send back to Corps when we were done, because they were dicey. They were having all kinds of problems. Well, it turns out that electrical storm had raised a lot of cane with them, and we didn't know how close the stuff was on top of us. Now, it doesn't happen very often. I mean, you're typically not going to be in that environment, but just as a heads up, that was heavy, full format, solid state. There was no microprocessors involved there. So this is another thing we need to remember, is we have radios that have greater sensitivity, like you just brought up. Okay, how many microchips are on board most of the equipment? To get that little Beifeng to do what it does for the size of the radio that it is, how many processors are on board? Well, that's going to be your weak point, along with, as I've said many times, the diodes. And I just bought a ton. In fact, I'll be quite honest, I just handled, before we started the program, I unloaded about 2 bundles of diodes the size of your fist that I ordered here from a sale that 2 of the companies had. And I've been buying all of the basic diodes that we know would go out. And they aren't expensive. I think I got I paid for those 2 big fistfuls, I paid $3. Because nobody's thinking that way. Everybody's thinking, they just replace the equipment. Well, you know what? Where are we going to get replacements down the road? Think about that one. We're going to take it from our enemy. Everybody's thinking about taking it from their enemy. Guys, they are a shopping center, but they're like the corner drugstore. They are not Walmart, okay? The enemy, when you kill them, aren't carrying a whole lot because they will be minimized, not maximized. We think heavy, they think light because government will always get them more.
Well,
okay?
The best radio they used for a while was that Harris radio. Remember the big Motorola Harris radio? What I'm talking about, the handheld one? So that's what they used to have. I don't know what they use now, not in the field.
Well, there's a couple of other. Actually, here's what happened. For a while there, they resurrected the old air traffic, field air traffic controller was those VHF, UHF radios that were handheld. They're good little rigs. And only recently, in fact, I just talked to somebody who says they're still using them. These are in middle to end of the war Vietnam era rigs that are handheld. They're about the size of they're a little smaller than those realistic CB radio handhelds they made back in the 70s. If you go to any of the Hamfests, like the Dayton Hamfest, I don't know where they're doing it now. I haven't checked this year because they even tore down the Harrow Arena. I just saw that the other day. They tore it down, guys. It's going to be gone. They had weather damage from one of the tornadoes, and they've just decided they're going to flatten it. So that's a lot of history going goodbye. But there's a crew down there now that uses those rigs. And they've got a lot of good information on that. And I'm talking to another guy who said, well, no, the ones they're getting right now, they're just now coming out of service in the last 3 or 4 years because they've been using them in the field. Now, that tells me something, that for all the gobbledygook they've invented in the last 30, 40 years, we got a 40-year-old plus piece of radio equipment. Actually, it's got to be 50 years old because if they used it in the 70s, they developed it in the late 60s, okay? So here we got a radio that was completely resurrected from the dumps, in other words, from the underground storage, and rather than inventing newer and better, they went back to that equipment because it works where most of the newer stuff might work coming out of the box, but doesn't work in the field for the long haul. What we were talking about earlier about ruggedization, in other words, it's got to have a lot of rubber baby buggy bumpers on it. And the first thing that happens with contractors and builders is they always skimp and they bean count. When they do that, they muck up the designs. And they've done this over and over again. So the cool thing is that a lot of this equipment coming out, what they've done, the only thing is they have actual encryption technology that they did add on. And some of that's coming out with these other radios now. Anyway, if you look it up, you'll find it. There's a club that's actually running them for fox hunting now, down in the Dayton Hamfest. And they do more than that. They just squawk and talk on them. They actually go all over the place. So they're kind of like 2 meter, it was for a long time and still is. They do the same thing, but they're a separate club now. Anyway, we're at the top, and we're in a separate hour. We got to get out of the way here. Good subject. Thank you, sir, for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Guys, for everybody out there, organize, arm, equip, and train as militia. Signal communications is not as complicated as you think, but you need to commit to it and find a person who wants to be your radio squawk man. The person who's going to be taking care of the technology. Give everybody a specialized job, but don't make them the only one that does it. Everybody learns the other person's job, and in the long run, you're that much more effective in the field. God bless our republic.
Yes, to the New World Order.
We shall prevail, ladies and gentlemen. The empire is on the run.
And we are on the march both day and night.
Hoorah. Again, for everybody out there, guys, we work as a team. We work together. They got the stinkers. We got the thinkers. We win. God bless. I'll be back in an hour. Ed taking over. Bye-bye.
It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. March along with the piper boys, we were born forever free. Let's go pay the piper boys. struggle, boys, fight for the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. Stand for the rights of man, boys, stand against all tyranny. Hang the lance of freedom, boys, high on the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. It will grow as we grow, boys, it will be as strong as we. We must cling to our faith, boys, faith in the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty.
We all need to prepare ourselves. You might have the food, water, gold, and silver, but ask yourself, are you truly prepared? That's why you need to visit.
This session is no longer being recorded.
Libertytreeradio.com carries everything you
Goodbye.
need: gas masks, fire starter kits, high-capacity magazines,